Imagine standing in one place where a single step could take you into another world. Behind one fence lies one of the world's richest democracies, a country filled with skyscrapers, global technology companies, and millions of people connected to the internet. Just a few meters away is one of the world's most secretive nations, where information is tightly controlled, borders are heavily restricted, and millions of citizens have never experienced life outside their country. The distance between these two worlds? Less than 4 kilometers. They speak the same language, share the same history, eat similar food, celebrate many of the same traditions. Yet today, they remain enemies. So how did one nation become two? And after more than 70 years, why are North and South Korea still divided? This is the story of one of history's most dangerous borders. For centuries, Korea existed as a single nation. Kingdoms rose and fell. Dynasties came and went. But despite wars and invasions, Korea remained one people. That changed in the early 20th century. In 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea. For the next 35 years, the Korean people lived under Japanese colonial rule. The occupation transformed nearly every aspect of Korean life. The Japanese government took control of schools, industries, newspapers, and political institutions. Many Koreans were pressured to adopt Japanese names, speak Japanese in schools, and abandon parts of their own cultural identity. Resistance movements emerged across the peninsula, but Japan maintained control until the final days of World War II. By 1945, Japan was losing the war. When it finally surrendered in August of that year, Korea expected freedom. Instead, something unexpected happened. As Japan surrendered, the victorious Allies had to decide who would oversee Japanese forces across Korea. The Soviet Union had entered the war against Japan from the north. The United States was approaching from the south. American officials worried that Soviet troops might occupy the entire peninsula before U.S. forces arrived. So 2 American officers were given an urgent task: choose a line that would divide responsibility between the two armies. According to historical accounts, they looked at a map and selected the 38th parallel. It wasn't chosen because of geography, or culture, or language. It was simply a practical line that roughly split the peninsula in half while leaving Seoul in the American zone. The proposal was accepted. Almost overnight, Korea was divided into 2 occupation zones. At first, many believed the division would be temporary. Few imagined it would become one of the most enduring and dangerous borders in modern history. The end of World War II marked the beginning of a new global rivalry. The United States and the Soviet Union had fought together against Nazi Germany. But once the war ended, that alliance quickly unraveled. The world entered what became known as the Cold War. It wasn't a direct war between the 2 superpowers. Instead, it was a global struggle between 2 competing political and economic systems. The United States supported democratic governments and capitalist economies. The Soviet Union backed communist governments with centrally planned economies. Korea became one of the first places where these competing visions collided. In the north, Soviet authorities helped establish a communist government led by a young guerrilla fighter named Kim Il-sung. In the south, the United States supported the creation of a separate government under Syngman Rhee. By 1948, what had begun as a temporary military arrangement had become 2 separate states, each claiming to be the legitimate government of all Korea. Neither side accepted the other's existence. The stage was set for a conflict that would change millions of lives. In the early hours of June 25, 1950, everything changed. Without warning, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel. Thousands of soldiers, supported by tanks and artillery, surged south. The invasion happened so quickly that many South Korean units were overwhelmed before they could organize a defense. Within just a few days, the capital city of Seoul had fallen. To many observers around the world, it looked as though South Korea would disappear within weeks. But the conflict was no longer just a civil war between 2 Korean governments. It had become a battlefield in the growing Cold War. The United States, acting under a United Nations command, sent troops to help defend South Korea. Soon, soldiers from more than a dozen countries joined the effort. The tide of the war began to shift. A daring amphibious landing at Incheon forced North Korean forces into retreat. UN troops advanced rapidly, pushing deep into North Korea. For a moment, It seemed possible that Korea would be reunited under one government. But then, another powerful nation entered the war. China feared that hostile forces on its border would threaten its own security. In late 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops crossed into North Korea. The battlefield changed overnight. UN forces were pushed back. Seoul changed hands multiple times. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Families fled in every direction, often with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. For the next 3 years, the fighting became brutal. Mountains were captured, lost, and captured again. Each side paid an enormous price for only small pieces of land. By the time the fighting slowed, millions of soldiers and civilians had been killed or wounded. Countless families had been separated, many never to see each other again. Villages disappeared. Cities had to be rebuilt from ruins. Yet despite all the destruction, neither side achieved complete victory. On July 27, 1953, representatives from North Korea, China, and the United Nations signed an armistice agreement. But here's the surprising part. They did not sign a peace treaty. The armistice simply stopped the fighting. Legally speaking, the Korean War was paused, not formally ended. The front line where the fighting stopped became today's Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Despite its name, the DMZ is one of the most heavily guarded borders on Earth. Stretching roughly 250 kilometers across the peninsula, it is lined with fences, guard posts, surveillance equipment, and military personnel. For decades, it has stood as a visible reminder that the conflict remains unresolved. On one side, the Republic of Korea, better known as South Korea. On the other, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. One people, one history, separated by a line that was never meant to last. More than 70 years have passed since the guns largely fell silent. So why hasn't Korea reunited? The answer isn't simple. Over the decades, the two Koreas have become two completely different societies. South Korea embraced a democratic system and a market economy. Today, it is home to global brands, advanced technology, world-famous entertainment, and one of the largest economies in Asia. North Korea followed a very different path. It became one of the world's most isolated states, governed by the Kim family for generations, with a tightly controlled political system and an economy shaped by sanctions, state planning, and limited international trade. The longer the two countries remained apart, the harder reunification became. The Korean Peninsula isn't just important to Koreans. It sits at the crossroads of some of the world's most powerful nations. The United States maintains a military presence in South Korea and considers it a key ally in the region. China, which shares a border with North Korea, sees stability there as vital to its own national security. Japan watches events closely because of its proximity and historical ties to the peninsula. Russia also has strategic interests in Northeast Asia. Because so many global powers are involved, any major change on the peninsula could reshape the balance of power in the region. That makes reunification far more than a domestic issue. It's an international one. Perhaps the biggest obstacle today is North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Over the years, North Korea has developed nuclear capabilities and tested ballistic missiles, arguing that they are necessary for its security. Many other countries view those weapons as a serious threat to regional and global stability. This has led to sanctions, diplomatic negotiations, periods of heightened tension, and occasional attempts at dialogue.
A new missile launch sparks global fears.
Leaders from
Diplomacy
North and
fails
South
to de-escalate.
Korea have
Satellite
met in
imagery
historic
reveals new
summits.
deployments.
Families separated by the war have even been allowed brief reunions after decades apart. These moments offer hope, but lasting progress has been difficult to achieve. Trust remains fragile. Is reunification possible? Many Koreans still dream of it. They share a common language, deep cultural traditions, and centuries of shared history. But reunification would also bring enormous political, economic, and social challenges. It would require trust between governments that have viewed each other as enemies for generations. It would require agreements on security, governance, and the future of millions of people. No one knows when, or if, that day will come. The division of Korea wasn't created by ancient rivals. It wasn't caused by differences in language or culture. It began with a line drawn on a map at the end of World War II. What was intended to be a temporary solution became one of the most enduring divisions in modern history. A war followed. Millions of lives were changed forever. And although the fighting largely stopped in 1953, peace was never fully achieved. Today, the Korean Peninsula remains a place where history, politics, and human lives intersect in remarkable ways. A reminder that sometimes, the consequences of decisions made in just a few moments can shape the lives of generations. And somewhere beyond the fences, watchtowers, and barbed wire, there are still families waiting for the day they can see each other again.